It's Dieter and Hutch, and we're talking about the big boys in the middle, defensive tackle day, as we go early, middle, and late here ahead of the 2025 NFL Draft. Jake, this is always some of our favorite film to grind, man, and this year's class provided some absolute doozies and some questions too. Let's be clear
Yeah.
about that. But this was a fun exercise.
Defensive tackle this year is a pure beauty is in the eye of the beholder class. You're going to have some people fall in love with guys where you're like, he's terrible. There's Deion Walkers who are like, this guy's giant and has the worst pad level in recorded human history. There's all sorts of stuff going on. There's guys who are defensive tackles who might be edge rushers who you don't know what position they play. There's
Yeah,
there's little squatty guys who shoot gaps. There's giant guys who are just round mounds of beef. And
it's the best.
there's
It's
everything
just
in
the best.
between, and it's beautiful.
This is football in its purest and most distilled form, or undistilled, whatever you want. I don't care if you want it raw or if you want it cooked up. Let's get right into it. Let's start with my guy. It's someone we've talked about a bunch on the channel already. I see no reason to move away from Walter Nolen. There has been a lot of conversation around Walter Nolen. I am not going to pretend as if Walter Nolen is just strictly a prospect at this point. Like, there are some rumblings out there that there's some red flag character stuff. I can't speak to any of it. What I can speak to is what he did on the field for Ole Miss this past season, what he has done in his college career. And simply put, I feel like in people's zeal to criticize Walter Nolen, they kind of miss the entire point of a Walter Nolen. This is a guy who gets off the line with violence and explosion. And frankly, there's very few guys in all of the sport who can get off the line the way that he does. That's a huge thing for the 49ers in particular, teams that run the wide nine zone. The Eagles, a big team about that. But I've heard a lot of people say, oh, he's not very good. He's not very good against the run. What tape are you watching? This guy was making run stop after run stop at Ole Miss this past season. He had a 12% run stop rate. That's an elite level this past season. And no, he's not necessarily a gap filler, someone who's holding the line. He was never meant to be that. If you ask him to do that, you're wasting an elite level of talent at the thing that's much, much harder to do. There's a lot of guys who can just stand there and be absorbed. It's much harder to get into the backfield and mess stuff up, bowl in the china shop. And oh, by the way, I think he's a better player against the run than he is against the pass. And everyone's out here saying that he's a pass rush merchant. They're not wrong about that in the sense that he's really good at pass rushing too. Walter
Yeah.
Nolen is an elite level defensive tackle in a wide split defensive line. If you're looking for a three technique, have I got a prototype for you? This is a game wrecker of the highest order. Is he Chris Jones? Is he Aaron Donald? No. But this is somebody who is going to come in, and he's not Jalen Carter either. But this is somebody who is going to come in and is going to affect the game in a positive way from the jump, and is going to be in the league for a long, long time. I'm still all the way in on Walter Nolen. I think that the stock, outside of external factors that I can't speak to, should continue to go up because there's just no stain on the guy's game. And the fact that we're talking about him at 20, the fact that we're talking about him as like the third or the fourth defensive tackle off the
Right.
board, it's ridiculous to me, Jake.
Yeah. I'm gonna bring up, the Michigan man and not Kenneth Grant. But like the fact that he's like behind Kenneth Grant, who's one of those guys that, like I talked about Deion Walker. Kenneth Grant's a guy where, like, if it works, okay, he's like a
Totally.
game wrecking defensive tackle. If it
Yeah.
doesn't work, he's Javon Kinlaw. So
In
there's like
that
a
in that he's wrecking the game in the exact opposite way of how you'd like a game wrecked. He's
with
ruining your chances of winning.
right, with total inconsistencies, and I think he's we'll see, but I think Walter Nolan is probably a better bet. I like him more than I like Kenneth Grant. I
Yeah.
just think he's got so much power. He's got so many unteachable traits that it works a lot. And there's inconsistencies where he's trying to move and he leaves open a gap where he's trying to spin off of something. And there's stuff that he needs to iron out in his game. I do think there's just a level of talent there and there's a level of production that you cannot teach and that you get in a building with a defensive line coach who understands how to coach guys who have that level of explosion and he's going to be a success. it's hard for me not to buy into that.
He's a 3-down player too. So many guys that will, maybe not that we'll talk about because we don't value specificity as much as maybe others, and especially teams do, because they can view it from that lens. We're trying to look for 3-down players, but there's so many guys in this class who are 2-down players or 1-down players at this position. Walter Nolen can do it all. And it sounds ironic coming from me, a well-documented negative Nancy, but like, how are the positives not outweighing whatever negatives
Yeah.
exist? Like, I hear what you're saying. Like, he can get a little wild at times. That is the downside of being so athletic that it's easy for you, that you can do whatever you want on the football field. Sometimes you're wildly out of position because you're wildly athletic. Other guys couldn't even dream of being that much out of position. So, yeah, right. You get some good coaching around him. That's going to change things. Also, you limit his role a little bit and allow him to grow
It's
into it.
exactly what I was thinking. Exactly where I was at.
Total game changer. Now, can you do that if you take him at number 11? You don't really have a choice, and it's probably not ideal, but you get him somewhere in the 20s, somewhere in the 30s, somewhere in the 40s, all of these possibilities available, a total and complete coup. I just put on the tape, put on any tape of Walter Nolen, and don't tell me that he is, and I'll give you this. He had some great players around him on that defensive line, but don't tell me that he's not the best player on that defensive line who has 4 players that we like at a very, very high level. 4 players
Yep.
that I think both of us would be very comfortable taking in the top 50 picks. And I include Pegues in that. If you took Pegues at 50, I'd be like, it's a stretch, but okay. Like, we love
Right.
him too. Like, Princely, and they got some dudes on that line.
Yeah.
That was the best team money could buy. This is why we don't like Jackson
yeah.
Dart.
God, so mad at that kid.
Let's talk about the guy of all guys, though. Like, this is
Mason
the
Graham.
unquestioned number one. Yeah, your guy, and I kind of forced you into this. I apologize, but we haven't talked about Mason Graham enough on this channel.
It's one of those things where there's like an obviousness to it, but you really do have to address it. And there's some like discussion of like, because Graham and Kenneth Grant played together, does one help the other, and neither one are actually that good, or because they're both so good. Whatever. You saw what the Rams did with Braden Fisk and Jared Verse. That seemed to work pretty damn well. I initially saw a little bit of Fisk in Mason Graham. But the thing with Fisk is Fisk doesn't have the same contact balance. He gets a little bit too vertical. Like, he gets upright a little bit. And I think Mason Graham, because he's got the wrestling background, he's much more of like a forklift, wrestling, rip and attack sort of guy. He gets engaged and he rips. He can really close the pocket down, and he's a guy that I think typically, I don't know, it's not that he didn't convert. He had what, 9 sacks this season, but I see him as a guy that's going to create a lot of pressures and open up stuff for other guys while also being gap sound. And that Grant is not a guy that is gap sound to me at all. He's super violent, he's super physical, a lot of splash. But Graham, to me, is a guy, they lined him up outside, they looped him in. He's listed at 6'3", but he like looks 6 feet because he's so wide.
You'd be convinced that he's as tall as he is wide, that he's
Totally.
a square of a human.
Totally. And that means he's winning the leverage battle almost every single time.
You never have to worry about pad level with this dude. It's
super wide, super squatty. Again, great contact balance. He's honestly able to set the edge in a weird way. Like, he's not a guy you want playing like 5 technique, but you can mix it up where he can play. He does have the athleticism to do that. I just think he's a guy that has an understanding, a variety of different moves to get to the passer. He's really reliable in the run game and can disengage and attack. And again, with that sort of squattiness and power he has, he's going to be able to be sound in the run game in a way that the 49ers have lacked. And I understand why he's the number 1 defensive tackle on the board, and nothing dissuades me from that.
Right.
But, the one thing is, like, he doesn't, I wouldn't say, like a Chris Jones or someone, like, he doesn't destroy plays with the same violence and consistency that you might want for someone. He's just really, really damn good most of the time.
He has a lot of traits that you would ascribe to players that aren't getting drafted in this spot. Like, there's some Poona Ford to him, or there's some Harrison Phillips to him. And again, when you're 6'3" and you're getting those comps, like, that's a compliment. right? Because those dudes are squatty. They are low. And
But
their
no one
game
can move
records,
like him.
they can't move like him. Like, there's not an obvious comparison because it also doesn't carry the pop or the flash of someone who, the only body comp that I can really get to is like kind of an Aaron Donald type, but it's not even close to
Yeah.
that. Aaron Donald was just everywhere. He was omnipresent. He's arguably the best to ever do it at that position. I got in a little bit of trouble, and
You?
I struggled to call it trouble because, like, I don't apologize for this at all. Like, I have a hard time taking him in the top 10. I totally am in agreement. He's the number one. But the lack of pop and the fact that I just keep saying, like, man, he's got some, Solomon Thomas did a lot of the same things that he did at Stanford, and it didn't work out. Like, it doesn't feel as if he has, and I know this is incorrect, but the tape I can't shake it. It doesn't feel as if he has the athleticism to be a game breaker at the NFL level, that requires a higher level, and that he's maybe just a really good and refined tackle. What do you see when you watch him that gives you the indication that he, in fact, has the explosion to just repeatedly win against the best of the best?
Yeah, I think it's one, like, for a guy that's as wide as he is, he's got really light and quick feet. And in combination with that sort of contact balance and the ability to get skinny and also pull off a variety of moves, I think he just has a number of ways. He's got he's got like the highest, I wouldn't say the highest floor, but he's got an incredibly solid foundation of, one, how to disrupt in the pass game, and two, like, his IQ is really high. Like, he's reading the play incredibly well. Like, when there's a screen, like, he sees it coming. And when he doesn't win instantly, he's patient. He's, like, not going to get out over his skis and try and disrupt a play when it's lost. He's going to make sure the pocket is contained. So he's really smart. He's got that sort of foundation and the little bit of wiggle that I think allows him to be really disruptive against a number of different type of offensive linemen.
Yeah.
But, like, you're right. Like, it's not like a 6'5", I'm gonna destroy you sort of
He doesn't
player.
feel like a game wrecker. And
I
when you're
think I
drafting,
think I think he
maybe
can be.
maybe it's
I
just
think
more
he can
subtle
be,
than
but I understand the hesitation.
it might just be my simple Midwestern mind. Like, it might just be as simple as, like, he does it in nuanced ways, and he affects the game in nuanced ways. It's more subtle. It's just he's consistently winning, and that wears one down. Like, there's no question that he's an outstanding player. There's no question that he should be the number one defensive tackle. I just question if he's the kind of defensive tackle, much like a running back, or much like, in some cases, like a corner or a safety, to where you take that guy this early because of premium scarcity and position premium and position scarcity. Like, is the drop off between him and the next guy on your list, Peebles, or the next guy on my list, Burch, like that high? Not really. And those are guys we're talking about 50, 60, 100. And again, I totally, if he is at 11 and the 49ers are drafting there, you put in the pick and you never think about it again, because he's going to be a really solid, excellent pro. The question is he going to be the kind of pro that helps change a defense? And when you're picking a defensive player, okay.
I think he is. I do think I understand where you're coming from, and I would say if it's him alone, you can game plan for him in a way where he's not like Aaron Donald, where he is going to overcome double teams and still make you totally reimagine your game plan off the bat. But I think he's a guy with such a foundation that he's going to build on it every single year and just become such a force that, with a guy like Bosa, I don't know how defenses are going to be able to account for them both properly. And I don't know. It's tough to delineate what makes you like a game wrecker versus what's not. It's hard for me to see him
as simple as explosion plays, and I don't see a lot of that. I see consistent winning. I'll give you a comp, and this is a compliment. he doesn't remind me of any defensive tackles, right? I can't peg him because it never feels appropriate. Like he's not in that upper. I can't peg him to the upper echelon, and I certainly don't want to besmirch him by comparing him again to like a Harrison Phillips, who was an outstanding player at Stanford and got drafted too late. He reminds me. This is maybe it's white guy to white guy. Joe Alt. Like, what about Joe Alt last year was like, oh, you got to take this guy? Nothing. Everything about Joe Alt was, yeah, he just wins like 98% of the time. And he has all the things that you're looking for. There's nothing wrong with Joe Alt. There's nothing wrong with Mason Graham. Legitimately, there's nothing wrong. And for some, that means he's perfect. But for some of us who crave upside, it leaves us wanting a little bit. It's the highest floor of any prospect in this draft, without question. There's no world in which Mason Graham is not a solid 10-year contributor in the NFL. Maybe 8 because of the position. But like, there's no world in which he fails.
Yeah.
So when you draft him, you go, well, that's one thing done. We have our 3 technique.
Right.
We're good. We're good. So if the 49ers can find that, hell yeah, that's a huge, huge win. But again, I'd like to see just a little bit more pop when we're talking about pick 11, pick 3, pick 5.
And also I will say Michigan does some weird stuff with their defensive fronts where he's looping a lot and in positions where you're like, can you just let him murder someone and just go heads up? Like, can he not be playing like a wide 9? Like
it might be as simple as he gets to the NFL and then it's like, oh, I underestimated him. But again, the same thing can go in reverse.
I get it. And we're not like really criticizing him. It's just he's like the clear number 1. And
again, the highest possible floor. I just don't know how much taller the ceiling is than the floor. And you know what? If you're making a draft pick, sometimes the best decision you could possibly make is just take the guy with the absolute highest floor that maybe I've ever seen. Like, I've just never been sure that someone is going to be good than him. But I don't know if he has the ability to be great, the kind of player that you have to force a game plan around, the kind of player that wins you a Super Bowl. Let's go into my guy, your guy. Who do you want to do?
You can get into Jordan Burch, who's
you want to talk
really
about an enigma,
funky
my friend.
Guy. Yeah.
Okay, so here's the deal with Jordan Burch. He didn't play defensive tackle. Our graphic here is it's not edge rushers. In this case, it is an edge rusher. He is a defensive tackle. Who at 6'6" and 295 pounds played on the edge the entirety of his career at Oregon. It makes
so weird, man.
They're so weird. Now they are a 3-man front. I'll give him that. But 281 of his 426 snaps last year were outside of the tackle. What? They played him at 7 technique or beyond on far more than half of his snaps last year. He is 6'6" and 295 pounds. And under normal circumstances, Jake, I would say I hate everything about this.
Yeah.
This is stupid, and I'm writing him off. And that is what I initially did, to be fully honest. I just said, like, I don't understand it. I'm going to give the coach, Dan Lanning is a hell of a coach. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt. And at a certain point, I go, we're not going to do imposter syndrome anymore.
Right.
My gut instinct is they totally misused this guy his entire career. That they don't understand that they had themselves an elite 3 technique, and they played him as a 7 or a 9. And you go back to
he was lined up, tight with their fronts. He wasn't always outside, but you're right. Like he was
had
playing
one snap in the A gap his entire collegiate career. And that's when they did a stack thing.
Yeah, but he was like a 4 sometimes. But it was like you're right.
He would play the eye every now and again. But they used him as an end, and they used him as an end in a 3-4 front, which a lot of times looked like a 4-man front.
Weird defense.
It's a weird defense, and his game didn't have a lot of juice, if we're being honest. So I'm throwing out the entirety of his Oregon career. Right? The fact of the matter is he could play that position and play it at a pretty high level. Not nothing that I'm like, oh, let's go get this guy. But he could play defensive end in the Big Ten at a pretty high level. What could happen if you played him in the right position? What would happen if you take a guy who has the pass rush skills, and he has impressive pass rush skills, and you put him in the middle of the line? His issue was he couldn't really stop the run. He could set the edge, but he couldn't really stop the run. Well, maybe it's because he's 6'6" and 295 pounds, and he's
Right.
out there in open space. Maybe if you put him in closed quarters, he'll be able to stop the run because he's built like a defensive tackle. It reminds me
Yeah.
of another Oregon Duck, Eric Armstead.
Dude, 100%. That's my comp for him. Dude,
This guy
you
is
wanna know
so frustrating.
you want to know who my other
Comp.
comp was?
Who?
Take a guess. You're not gonna
DeForest
get
Buckner. No?
it. Gumby on steroids. that's
It's
that's
it's
and
where
maybe it's just the green, but like I had him like superlative is like punchy. Like his
yeah.
upside is I said strong defensive end, but I really am with you. I think he's a defensive tackle. I think he's an Eric Armstead type.
There's no world in which he's not a defensive tackle except for the one that somehow exists in Eugene, Oregon. There's no
Right.
team in college football. Ohio State would have put him at defensive tackle. Like
You
there's
could
no team.
you could have him on early downs as like a 5 technique for setting the edge, but
Sure.
like he is in no world is he getting outside more than that. He is a 3-5 guy and more 3 than 5 by far.
No
I think the
question.
downside, right, would be that he's like an in-betweener and doesn't really find a spot and
Mhm.
doesn't find enough consistency in either part of the game. But I do think he's so powerful. He's got such a great punch that his like floor is like a really solid guy who's creating some force inside. He can bend and get a little bit skinny, and because he's so tall and he's not like stout, I mean he's physical, he's strong, but like
Yeah.
he is skinny for a guy who's as tall as he is.
He carries
Like
his weight very well.
he's got a lot of multifaceted ability to him where you can use him in a number of ways, but he's just I think as a 3 tech, I think he's going to be really powerful and wreak havoc and like learn and develop. And it might be a guy who's got some inconsistencies and
Oh, yeah.
frustrates you for a couple of years, and then by late year 2 or something,
Yeah.
3,
Year
gonna start
year
figuring it
3,
out.
year 3, he's either going to be on a second team or he is going to be considered one of the best interior pass rushers in the league. Like
Like a
you want to
juiced up. I guess
here's a Chris
Menahu's
Jones.
different, but
No,
yeah.
here's a Chris Jones. He has a lot of the same traits that Chris Jones has. I guess you could have played Chris Jones at edge. You know,
Well, he
like
does sometimes. He
yeah,
does.
he does sometimes. This is what I'm saying. Like, so I'm not saying that he is. I'm saying he could be. That's your ceiling.
Yeah.
So the opposite of a Mason Graham, where you're talking about like his ceiling and his floor are both at the highest possible level. He is what he is, and that is outstanding. Jordan Burch could be up there with Graham, maybe even a little bit higher, right? Because he has the physical traits that are just like you can't teach 6'6", 300.
Yeah.
But the floor is just, oh, you're not a good football player, which I don't
Right.
think is the case.
Right.
I am betting specifically here on Oregon being weird, not a hard bet to make. I'm betting on what I saw was really good pass rush ability and size. And that if you get him into a true one gap system and you put him at the right position, which is a 3 technique or a 4 eye, and you just say, go get, that he is so big and so skilled with his hands and with his punch and with his legs that he will. And that if you put him in the right position, he'll actually look like the football player he could have been. And by the way, you played him at the wrong position his entire career, and people are still talking about him as a day 2 pick.
And remember Eric Armstead, like he had injuries and took forever to figure it out, and
They didn't
then
move him inside until his 4th
he
year in
made
the
it
league.
right. He made his money because he played 5,
Yeah.
but he really is a defensive tackle. I'm gonna go to my next guy,
Let's do it.
who 49ers
We-
are gonna cut Javon Hargrave, right?
We love this guy. We love this guy.
So I love him, and also there's a discussion to be had here. So
Okay.
Aeneas Peebles, I want to say it's Aeneas. It's Aeneas.
It's Aeneas.
Peebles. Aeneas Peebles. Superlative squatty gap shooter. So this is a guy that the 49ers would traditionally love. Like this is, you want a 1-for-1 replacement for Javon Hargrave? I know of no better guy in this draft than Aeneas Peebles because that's what he does. He is a Hargrave clone, a guy who will disrupt interior offensive linemen consistently, threaten to be a double-digit sack total guy, and force problems in the backfield as an upside. That is like his upside. The downside And the discussion we had about like eating your vegetables as a defensive tackle and holding up gaps is that he wants to shoot his gap. And that's what the 49ers have coached. And that there's a real concern and consideration that he lacks a little discipline. And like the 49ers, other defensive tackles in the past, because he wants to attack and attack and attack, can be countered. He can be walled off by, guards just turning their hips. And he's more of a disruptor than a finisher. So there could be a lot of like nearly great plays that don't finish. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because disruption in its own right is a net positive.
Creates something. Yeah, it gives you something.
Right. But I think he's a guy that's going to work best as a hyper aggressive nose in 3 like 5 down fronts. Like Javon Hargrave, which is where Javon Hargrave had his best years. He also came to the 49ers with a lot of wear and tear on those knees and those legs, and they just overpaid and got him at the wrong time in his career. Peebles can be sort of a blind rusher on his plays, and I'm not sure he's going to be gap sound. And I'm not sure about like the lateral athleticism, but I do think he's got some wiggle to him and some contact balance. But I do really like him, and I do think the 49ers, if they stick to their philosophy and the way they've evaluated defensive tackle, they're going to really like him too, because you watch him and he's disruptive. Like he's getting into the backfield consistently. It's just, I don't think he's a 2-gap. Right. I think you want him as like attack. And so you might need a guy to counterbalance him.
3rd down, 2nd down guy.
Totally. But
situation.
in that role, he's going to be really disruptive, I think, right off the bat.
Totally. And by the way, for a middle pick, that is great. That's a good situational player. That's someone who has a role on the team. When we talk about the NFL draft, 1st round, you need to be a starter, right? And I know that not everybody is immediately going to be a starter, but like it has to be like clear that you should be starting. Like you should be so lucky that you're on a team that doesn't need you to, but like you're starting. 2nd, 3rd round, top 100, frankly.
Yep.
That is, you need to have a role. You need to be someone that the team is counting on to do something week in and week out. That could be you're the starting quarterback. It could also be I need you to be in here as a 3rd down pass rusher at one technique. Like that's all we're using you for. Like you are in here to do this job. That is a job, and that's a job of serious importance, particularly in this league where 3rd downs are everything. Peebles doesn't look the part physically, right? He is interestingly cut, but every time he just jumps off the screen, man. And I thought you and I have a differing opinion on the Virginia Tech defensive line. I kind of liked them. You were kind of down on him. That doesn't matter. We're both in agreement that this guy has pop. And when he doesn't have pop, he's 10 yards in the other direction.
Right. And he's squatty. He's like 6'1", 290. But like there's a lot there. And I think it's something where if like you don't go Graham, if you don't go Walter Nolen, the 49ers go another route. Now it feels wide open, the direction they could go, because 11 feels like a spot where you could trade down and still get one of the top talents. It feels like there's a lot of guys that are on a similar level right around that selection. And then by pick a little after 20, it's going to drop off precipitously.
It goes to hell. Yeah.
But to be
fair, there'll be a couple of guys who will jump into that and a couple of guys who will fall out. I mean, we'll get into all of those nuances later, but it'll probably be more than 20. It'll probably be around 23, 24, but it's a good ballpark.
And so Peebles is a guy where if you don't go that route, you don't address it round 1 or 2. And Omar Norman Lott is a guy that we both really love and would typically have in here, but we've talked about him. And he's a guy that I think is like a great fit too. He's like
disruptive. The opposite. He's the opposite of Peebles in some ways, to where it's just like he is just going to hold the damn line and win rep after rep against every guard and center he's going up against. He is just stout. Throw as many people as you want. He's not moving, and you're going backwards. Peebles is like a little DJ Jones. Like, I'm getting in there, and if I don't, it ain't gonna look good.
Right. And so I think it's sort of a range where if you don't go early and the 49ers say, screw it, we want Malachi Starks. We want Malachi Starks to fix our secondary and be a dynamic playmaker for us, and we're going to get another corner. Yeah. And then you go and get like a guy like Peebles, and then you're like, all of a sudden we built up.
What range are we talking about? Do you have a number in mind on where
I think round 3. I think 99 makes more sense than 75.
Okay.
with the 49ers
Mhm.
picks, but I think 75 wouldn't be out of the question to me.
And the Niners do like to be early as opposed to late, so something there. We both really like Peoples, and you need probably more than one defensive tag. You definitely need more than
Yep.
one defensive lineman. Um, Taking 2 bites later on in the draft, not the worst idea, because if you go really
Yep.
early, now you're chasing needs at other positions in the middle, and now you're going late, and there's a nice meaty
Yeah.
middle with this
Who's
defensive
your
tackle
late?
class.
Who's your late? Who you going for late, Dieter?
Jake, I love, and I mean this. This is a Dieter stamp of approval guy if there ever was one. I love CJ West, defensive tackle out of Indiana.
Just to interrupt for a second. I was watching a show last night, and we're watching on my laptop, and then
Yeah.
Caroline just seen message after message. Peter's like, you gotta watch CJ West. He's like, I love him. I think I love him. You need to change the graphic. I love CJ West.
I think there was about 40.
Still botched the graphic, by the way. It says that.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it. We don't have to show it that much. Let's just watch my giant head. No, so CJ West. I hadn't heard much about him. He hadn't popped up on my radar until last night. And full disclosure, I was just like, I don't feel great. I have a couple of guys. Really like the kid out of Notre Dame. There was a couple of guys who I'm like, yeah, I feel good about it. I didn't feel some type of way about any of them. I didn't feel like excited. It was kind of like how we finished off our cornerback video. I'm like, yeah, I guess we'll just take this guy. So I didn't want to do that again. I want to feel good about it. I want to feel excitement about defensive linemen, about offensive linemen. I want to feel something about them because it's such a physical part of the game. It should be felt. And full disclosure, I was checking out the PFF ratings and I go, who was a good run stopper? And then you look and a lot of them are, a small school, undersized. Great. They're good college football players. Nothing wrong with that. And there was a name that had come up vaguely over the last couple of days that I had never really looked into, which was when I have a couple databases. I was kind of running some numbers, and CJ West kept coming up.
Yep.
And I didn't even know who CJ. I don't remember CJ West when I watched Indiana, whatever. So I go, let's watch CJ West. Easier said than done, my friend. And I finally find some, the Ohio State film. And let me tell you, you really can tell when CJ West is not on the field for Indiana, who was outstanding this past season.
Yeah,
save
for a team that like did as well as they did, it's really hard to find Indiana tape.
It was hard to find the all-22 at least. Luckily, you don't need it that much when we're talking about defensive tackles. So CJ West, 6'2", 317 pounds. Is it a well-carried 317? Not particularly. He's a chunky boy. A little lumpy, if we're being fully blunt here. I can say it because I'm lumpy too. But he just won so many reps, and it was a deftness in the winning of the reps. He was outstanding against the run. And this was an Ohio State team that had arguably the best offensive line in college football this past season. They were really impressive. I know Texas had a really good one as well. I liked Ohio State's a lot more. They handled my mid-round guy pretty well in both games this year. CJ West just kept winning and winning and winning and winning. A true 3 technique, a true 1 gap guy. There was a play where they just ran outside zone and he engaged with the guard, rode him all the way to the edge, and made the tackle. So he was setting the edge from the interior of the defensive line. That's the kind of stuff that nobody else in college football does. And CJ West, we've used the term a couple of times here, game wrecker. I don't know if he's of that echelon, but I'll say it again. When he wasn't on the field, Indiana looked appreciably worse in both facets of the game. Walter Nolen's run stop and pass rush win numbers and run stop numbers were like 11 and 12. You know who else had 11 and 12 in those stats? CJ West. CJ West is the guy. He's the guy. I love a lot of players in this draft. I'm a little bit early. I'm going to find all the warts. Don't get me wrong, because the CJ West came on the wavelength late. But as of right now, if I had to take a stand, CJ West is the one player you don't leave this draft without. You can already have Mason Graham on the team. You can already have 2 defensive linemen on the squad. If you're in the 5th, 6th, 7th round and CJ West is on the board, it's a no-brainer. I don't care what your needs are. I don't care what you've drafted, haven't drafted. CJ West is a winner This guy won and won and won. He is consistent. It wasn't a one-stop shop. Like, he had a good run prior to going to Indiana. He upped his game at Indiana. CJ West is that dude. He is my favorite player in this draft so far. He is my Kamani Vidal from last year.
Wow.
I love CJ West.
Well, that's perfect. I like him a lot too. I'm not even going to criticize him because I'm going to get into the guy that I love equally as much, and I've been on him from the start. Vernon Broughton, folks.
We love Vernon
We already
Broughton.
made a video about Vernon Broughton, but I cannot fathom. And he's climbed a little bit from ESPN had him 17th. Now he's 15th.
That's
and,
the old
and
Jake Hutchinson bump, baby.
And I swear to God, it is because I think the short we made is like you type in Vernon Broughton and that's what comes up. I swear to God, I have a second and third round grade on him. Like he's a guy that's viewed as like, oh, you can get him in like round 6. That's insane to me. He's so goddamn good. He played at Texas. He was a game wrecker. And I mean that. We talked about game wrecker and what does that mean? He was a game wrecker against Ohio State. And I truly mean that. You want to talk about like just briefly like, you know, PFF grades can be inconsistent, whatever. He had an 86.1 grade on defense. He had an 86.2 pass rush grade and a 79.1 run defense grade. And he's like viewed by some people as like a run first defender. He is so goddamn stout. I cannot describe to you how much I love him. He played 55 games, 16 starts. He, you know, had 5.5 sacks, 10.5 tackles for a loss, 4 fumble recoveries, 3 pass breakups, 1 forced fumble. He's like a graduate student, so he's an older guy.
Yeah,
he's
there's gonna be a lot of those.
305. He is so stout. He's as well balanced as any defensive tackle in the class. My superlative is that he's a wiggly bull. Like, to me, his upside is a that's right, genuinely elite pass rusher with a fantastic power foundation for stopping the run and an all-pro player. His downside, inconsistent run defender, and that his get off and power doesn't translate to the league as much, and his lack of like athleticism, you know, we'll see, makes him like a limited run defender, and he becomes a rotational NFL player. But I, for the life of me, cannot fathom him not being a useful NFL player. And that's his floor. Like, I really do think he's going to be a really disruptive defensive tackle. And people are going to say he was drafted in late round 4.
Yeah.
What are we talking about? Like,
and by the way, he'll get drafted in late round 4, and a lot of people will be like, "That's a stretch. That's a stretch."
100%. His force in the run game is like really surprising given how effective he is. His hands in the pass game, his swipe move, his ability to rip and just destroy offensive linemen's hand and bend for a guy who's 6'4", 305. Like, I cannot be more convicted. You want to talk about him and Trey Amos right now are like my 2 rubber stamps. I'm fully in on those guys. And if Vernon Broughton goes in round 5, I'll lose it. I bet you he goes by round 4 at the minimum and might go round 3. And I don't understand why he's being mocked so late. Watch him.
Well, I'm in agreement. Listen, you don't have to.
I don't know why I'm yelling at you. You're on the same page.
What do you make of the fact that Alfred Collins shares a position and a line with him? Because I watch Alfred Collins and I feel okay about it. Like, he was a viability in the mid rounds. But I like Broughton more than Collins. Like,
how do
you manage that? How do you square that?
I square that because I watched a lot of reps where like they had no real connection to each other, and I know that's like there's always some connection the way offensive lines game plan. But when I watch like Collins, like he's got really strong hands, but like he's bad in the run game, and he can get displaced 5 yards down the field. He's got bad pad level. His anchor's inconsistent. He's bendy. He's almost more of like a 5 technique in a way, but he's really, really sloppy.
Inverse Jordan Burch.
Totally. And I just think like a guy that's that big, he should be able to drive. And I see so many inconsistencies in his game, and I see almost none in Broughton's game. Not none. There's some inconsistencies, whatever. But like,
you can say what you
I
want.
just see him as a really reliable player. And if you watch him in that last game against Ohio State, every single damn play, he was a problem. And I'm not
was.
exaggerating. It's
He was awesome.
phenomenal
He was totally
to watch.
awesome. And someone's going to see it, right? We're in mock draft land. This is
Get my
bozos
blood
like
pressure
us.
up here.
Well, let's bring it down, baby. Let's bring it down. Like, this is just bozos like us, guys, aggregators. We're in the realm of nonsense at this moment. Now, we're trying to not bring nonsense. Ultimately, our brand of no nonsense probably is nonsense, and it becomes paradoxical and all that. Regardless, I think everything's going to be okay. I think that you're seeing things right. And I view you as a reliable player, Jake. So I'm going to trust you. Vernon Broughton, late round. Let's go through your guys one more time. Mason Graham, really went out on a limb there. I'm sorry, I did it to you. My bad. And then Aeneas Peebles, who is just lightning in a bottle, man. You don't know what you're going to get, but it might be fun. It might also kill you. And then Vernon Broughton as a just, I don't get it, defensive tackle.
I would fully take him in round 3 and put that pick in and feel great about it.
That's your guy. Walter Nolen, right? Just perfect. 3 technique in a 1 gap system. Jordan Burch should probably play the position he was meant to play.
Yep.
We're going to find out at the NFL level if someone's smart enough. And by the way, there's no team that's like, yeah, we're going to keep him at edge. We're going to keep him on the edge. No team. Not even the Jaguars. And then CJ West, who's just my new favorite obsession. Just all he does is win. We love defensive tackles. We love our last 2 guys, Vernon Broughton and CJ West. Stamp them, baby. They're in the book. They're our guys. If you want to be one of our guys or gals or whatever these days, you can become an official sicko on the channel. All you have to do is subscribe and then join as a member. And if you do become a member, a sicko, if you will, you'll get Jake's, mostly at the moment, soon to be also Dieter's draft guide, in which we're going to go over hundreds of players with analysis, perhaps even deeper than the analysis we've already provided you here regarding prospects for the 2025 NFL draft. I hope I've sold this, Jake.
It will be deranged, and we will let you know when it's out, but we're churning away at it, and I swear to God, as insane as it is, I am having fun trying to churn through something like 200 players. So we'll let you know when it's out, but we are working on it, and we will get it to you. We will get it to you, even if it kills us, and it damn well might.
Subscribing costs you nothing. You should do it. You should support the channel. Help us out with the algorithm. Our robot overlords will look upon us with favor if you subscribe and give thumbs up to these videos. If you like them. If you don't, just don't do anything. That'd be cool. You can become a sicko if you really like it. That will get you the draft guide. We have more position breakdowns coming. We're going to get into a lot of stuff between now and the NFL draft. Looking forward to it immensely. Thanks for the insight, Jake, and long live defensive tackles.
That's right.